The sound of her own heartbeat echoed in Adelaide Dawson's ears as she lay curled beneath the wooden pew. Her threadbare shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the November chill that crept through every crack in the small church's walls. She had been sleeping here for 3 weeks now, ever since the boarding house owner had thrown her belongings into the dusty street of Lusk, Wyoming, demanding payment she could not provide. The year was 1878, and winter was coming early to the high plains, bringing with it a bitter cold that seemed to seep into her very bones each night she spent on the hard floor of this sanctuary. Adelaide was 22 years old, though she felt decades older as she pressed her cheek against the rough wooden floorboards and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger in her belly. She had come west 6 months ago with such hope burning in her chest, carrying letters from her aunt in Cheyenne, who had promised her work as a seamstress. But when Adelaide finally arrived after that long, exhausting journey by train and stagecoach, she discovered her aunt had died 2 months prior from pneumonia. The little dress shop had been sold to pay debts, and Adelaide found herself alone in a territory where she knew no one, with only $15 to her name and nowhere to go. She had tried to find work in Cheyenne, but the city was full of women just like her, desperate for respectable employment. When she heard that Lusk, a smaller town to the north, might have opportunities, she spent her last few dollars on passage there. The town was rough and small, built around the cattle industry and the railroad, with more saloons than churches. She had managed to find work doing laundry for 2 weeks before the woman who ran the laundry took ill and closed her business. After that, Adelaide's money ran out faster than she could have imagined. The church had become her refuge purely by accident. She had been sitting in a pew one evening, trying to pray for guidance, when exhaustion overcame her and she fell asleep. When she woke hours later, the building was dark and locked, and rather than wake anyone or draw attention to her predicament, she had simply stayed until morning. The next night, desperate and cold, she had returned deliberately, slipping in before the evening service ended and hiding until everyone left. The pastor, an elderly man named Reverend Thomas, was kind but absent-minded, and he never noticed her presence as she made herself small in the shadows. Tonight was colder than usual, and Adelaide's thin body shook despite her efforts to stay still. She wore every piece of clothing she owned, which amounted to 2 dresses layered one over the other, a worn petticoat, her shawl, and a pair of boots that were developing holes in the soles. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday morning when the baker's wife had taken pity on her and given her half a loaf of day-old bread. She did not hear the door open. The wind was howling too loudly outside, rattling the window frames and masking the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. It was only when a deep male voice spoke directly above her that Adelaide realized she was no longer alone. "Madam, you cannot sleep here." Her eyes flew open and her heart leaped into her throat. She scrambled out from under the pew, her shawl tangling around her arms, and found herself staring up at a tall man silhouetted against the dim light of the oil lamp he carried. For a terrifying moment, she thought it was the sheriff come to arrest her for trespassing, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw this was no lawman. The man wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim trousers, a heavy wool coat, scuffed leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He was probably in his mid-20s, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who spent their days in hard physical labor. "Please," Adelaide heard herself whisper, her voice hoarse from disuse and cold. "Please do not tell anyone. I will leave. I will go somewhere else." The cowboy set his lamp down on the nearest pew and crouched so he was closer to her level. In the warm glow of the light, She could see his face properly now. He had strong features, a straight nose, dark eyes that studied her with concern rather than anger, and a firm jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, curling at the edges where it touched his collar. "How long have you been sleeping in this church?" he asked, and his voice was gentler now, though still deep and rough around the edges. Adelaide clutched her shawl tighter and tried to sit up straighter, tried to maintain some shred of dignity even though she knew she must look like something the wind had blown in. "A few days," she lied, unwilling to admit the full extent of her circumstances. "Try again." He picked up the lamp and held it higher, illuminating the corner where she had been sleeping. Adelaide followed his gaze and felt her cheeks burn with shame. There, arranged as neatly as she could manage, were the few possessions she owned: a small carpet bag containing a change of undergarments, a hairbrush, a photograph of her parents who had both died when she was 16, and a leather-bound book of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She had also collected several old newspapers to place under her body for insulation against the cold floor, and there was the stub of a candle she had found and saved for emergencies. 3 weeks, she admitted quietly, looking down at her hands. They were red and chapped from cold and rough work, the nails broken and rimmed with dirt she could not seem to scrub away no matter how hard she tried when she snuck water from the pump behind the general store. The cowboy was quiet for a long moment. Adelaide braced herself for what would come next. He would tell the reverend, or worse, the sheriff. She would be run out of town or perhaps arrested. She had heard stories of women in her position being forced into workhouses or brothels, and the thought made her stomach turn with fear. Instead, he said something she never expected. "Church is cold. Home is warm." She looked up at him, confused. "I beg your pardon," he stood, his full height impressive in the small space, and extended his hand down to her. "My name is Nathan Kane. I work at the Circle K Ranch about 4 miles west of town. We have a foreman's house that is sitting empty right now. It is not much, but it has a stove and a bed and a roof that does not leak. You can stay there." Adelaide stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a snake that might bite her. "I do not understand. Why would you offer me such a thing? You do not even know me." "I know you are sleeping on a church floor in November, and that tells me enough," Nathan said simply. "I came into town tonight to pick up supplies, and I saw candlelight flickering through the church window as I rode past. Thought maybe someone had left a lamp burning and might burn the place down, so I came to check. Found you instead." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," Adelaide said, even as her body screamed at her to take the offer, to accept any shelter that might save her from another freezing night on these boards. Nathan lowered his hand but did not look offended. "It is not charity. The house needs someone to live in it, to keep the stove going so the pipes do not freeze, and to make sure no drifters break in and use it for trouble. You would actually be doing the ranch a favor. And if you want to earn your keep proper, the ranch cook is getting too old to manage all the work himself. He could use help with cleaning and preparing meals for the hands. It would not pay much, but it would be honest work, and you would have a place to sleep that is not this floor." Adelaide's mind raced. Every sensible part of her said this was too good to be true, that no man offered something for nothing, that accepting could put her in a worse situation than she was already in. But another part of her, the part that was cold and hungry and desperately tired, wanted to weep with relief at the possibility of a warm bed and regular meals. "I would work," she said firmly, meeting his eyes. "I would work hard for whatever you provide. I am not lazy, sir. I simply have had very poor fortune since coming to Wyoming." "I believe you," Nathan said, and something in his tone told her he meant it. Gather your things. My horse is outside and we can ride double out to the ranch tonight. Tomorrow you can meet Cookie. That is what we call the cook, and he will set you to whatever tasks need doing." Adelaide's hands shook as she gathered her few belongings and stuffed them back into her carpet bag. This felt like a dream, the kind she had been having where she woke up somewhere warm only to find herself still on the cold church floor. But when Nathan picked up her bag and gestured for her to follow him toward the door, his solid presence seemed real enough. She wrapped her shawl around her head and shoulders and followed him out into the bitter November night. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. Nathan's horse, a sturdy bay gelding, stood tied to the hitching post in front of the church, its head lowered against the wind. Nathan secured her bag to his saddle, then mounted in one smooth motion before reaching down for her. "Put your foot on mine and take my hand," he instructed. Adelaide had never ridden a horse in her life. In Philadelphia, where she had grown up, there had been streetcars and carriages. But she was not about to admit another inadequacy, so she did as he said, placing her worn boot on top of his and grasping his hand. His grip was strong and calloused, and he lifted her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling off as the horse started moving. They rode out of town at a steady pace, heading west into the darkness. Adelaide had been cold before, but riding through the night with the wind tearing at her clothes was a new level of misery. She pressed closer to Nathan's back, seeking any warmth she could find, and felt him adjust his heavy coat so that part of it covered her hands where they gripped his middle. It was a small kindness, but it made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The ride felt endless, though it was probably only 30 or 40 minutes before Nathan slowed the horse and called out, "There it is." Adelaide lifted her head from where she had pressed it against his shoulder and peered around him. In the moonlight, she could make out the shape of a small wooden house, dark and isolated on the prairie. Beyond it, perhaps a quarter-mile further, she could see the larger shapes of barns and bunkhouses and the main ranch house, with a few lights still burning in windows. Nathan guided the horse right up to the small house and dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, numb from cold and the unfamiliar position of riding. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The interior was pitch black and not much warmer than outside, but at least the wind was blocked. Adelaide heard Nathan moving around, striking a match. Warm light flared as he lit an oil lamp, revealing a single large room that served as kitchen, sitting area, and bedroom all in one. There was a small iron stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the far wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs and a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. It was sparse and simple, but to Adelaide it looked like a palace. "I will get a fire going," Nathan said, moving to the stove. "There is water in that pitcher if you are thirsty, and I think there might be some canned goods in the cupboard if you are hungry." Adelaide watched as he efficiently built a fire in the stove, feeding and kindling and then larger pieces of wood until flames were crackling cheerfully behind the iron door. Already, she could feel the beginning of warmth spreading through the room. When he stood and brushed off his hands, she found her voice. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "You do not know me. I could be a thief or worse." Nathan studied her for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful in the lamplight. "My mother died when I was 15, he said quietly. "My father took to drinking and lost our farm in Kansas. I came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and $10 in my pocket. A rancher named Samuel Kelly found me sleeping in his barn and gave me work instead of running me off. That was 9 years ago. Samuel died last year and left the ranch to his daughter, but I still work here, and I still remember what it felt like to have nowhere to go and no one to help." He moved toward the door, picking up his hat from where he had set it on the table. "Sometimes we get a chance to be for someone else what someone once was for us. That is all this is." Before Adelaide could respond, before she could find words adequate to express her gratitude, he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. She heard the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the night, and then she was alone in the warm, quiet room. Adelaide sank down into one of the wooden chairs and pressed her hands to her face. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she wiped her face with her sleeve, stood on shaking legs, and made herself eat a small amount of beans from a can she found in the cupboard. Her stomach, unused to food, cramped at first, but she forced herself to eat slowly and drink water. When she finally lay down on the narrow bed, still fully clothed because she was too cold to undress, she pulled the worn quilts up to her chin and felt warmth seeping into her body for the first time in weeks. The bed was not soft, the mattress was thin, and the springs creaked, but it was infinitely better than the church floor. As sleep pulled her under, her last thought was of Nathan Kane's dark eyes and the simple kindness in his voice when he said, "Church is cold, home is warm." She woke to bright sunlight streaming through the small window and the sound of someone knocking firmly on the door. For a disoriented moment, Adelaide had no idea where she was, and then memory flooded back. She sat up quickly, her body protesting after so many nights on hard surfaces, and called out, "One moment, please." She scrambled to make herself presentable, smoothing down her wrinkled dresses and trying to finger-comb her tangled dark hair into some semblance of order. When she opened the door, she found a short, barrel-chested man with a full gray beard and twinkling blue eyes standing on the step. He wore an apron over his clothes and held a covered basket in his hands. "So you are the girl Nathan told me about," he said, his voice carrying a hint of an Irish accent. "I am Cookie, though my Christian name is Patrick Murphy. Nathan said you might be willing to help an old man with his kitchen duties." "Yes, sir," Adelaide said quickly. "I would be very grateful for the work." Cookie's eyes softened as he looked at her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw more than she wanted him to see, the hunger and desperation that she could not quite hide. "Come along then," he said. "I brought you some breakfast, but you can eat it while I show you around the kitchen. There is much to do, and we can talk as we work." Adelaide grabbed her shawl and followed him across the cold prairie grass toward the main cluster of ranch buildings. As they walked, Cookie explained the layout of the ranch. The main house where Miss Kelly lived was the large two-story building with the wraparound porch. The bunkhouse where most of the ranch hands slept was the long, low building to the east. The barn, stables, and various outbuildings for equipment and storage surrounded a large central yard. The kitchen was a separate building attached to the back of the main house by a covered walkway. Cookie explained that it had been built this way to prevent kitchen fires from spreading to the main house, a common practice on ranches and in many Western homes. Inside, Adelaide found a large, well-equipped space with a massive cast iron stove, long work tables, shelves full of dishes and cooking implements, and a substantial larder stocked with supplies. "We feed about 15 men 3 times a day," Cookie said, setting his basket on the table and pulling out a plate covered with a cloth. Beneath it were eggs, bacon, and 2 thick slices of bread with butter. Adelaide's mouth watered at the sight. Breakfast is usually simple: eggs, bacon, beans, biscuits, coffee. Lunch is often sandwiches or leftovers from dinner. Dinner is where I try to give them something hearty: stews, roasts, potatoes, vegetables when we have them. Can you cook?" Adelaide picked up the fork he handed her and began eating, trying not to wolf the food down like an animal despite her hunger. "I can manage basic dishes," she said between bites. "My mother taught me before she died. I am better with cleaning and preparation than I am with actual cooking, but I am willing to learn." "That is fine. I will do the cooking. You help with the preparation and the cleaning up after. There is always mountains of dishes and my back is not what it used to be. I also need help with the baking. Kneading bread dough is getting difficult for my hands." He held up his gnarled fingers, which were clearly twisted with arthritis. "We will try it out for a few days, see how we work together. If it goes well, I will talk to Miss Kelly about making it a permanent arrangement with proper wages." "Thank you," Adelaide said earnestly. "I promise I will work hard." "I believe you will," Cookie said, that soft look in his eyes again. "Now finish eating, and then I will show you where everything is kept." The first day of work was exhausting. Adelaide helped Cookie prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, who came in shifts starting before dawn. She washed dishes, scrubbed pots, swept floors, and helped knead enough bread dough to make her arms ache. She peeled potatoes and carrots for the evening stew, hauled water from the pump, and learned where every utensil and dish was stored. The ranch hands who came through for meals were a rough-looking lot, weather-beaten men who smelled of horses and leather and honest sweat. Most of them nodded politely to her, but did not speak much, too focused on their food and too tired from their work to engage in conversation. She saw Nathan only briefly when he came in with the second shift for breakfast. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and he gave her a small nod that she returned, but he did not approach her or single her out in any way. She found herself oddly disappointed by this, though she told herself she was being foolish. He had helped her, that was all. She should not expect or hope for anything more. That evening, after the dinner dishes were finally clean and Cookie had dismissed her for the night, Adelaide walked back to the small house through the gathering dusk. Her whole body ached from the unaccustomed work, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from useful labor rather than from sleeping on cold floors. The house was still warm from the morning fire, and she built it up again, feeding in wood until the stove was radiating heat. She found a basin and used some of her precious water to wash herself as best she could, scrubbing away weeks of accumulated grime and desperation. She washed out her undergarments and hung them to dry near the stove, then put on the one clean shift she owned and crawled into bed. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. The next 2 weeks fell into a routine. Adelaide rose before dawn and hurried to the kitchen to help Cookie prepare breakfast. She worked through the day, learning the rhythms of the ranch kitchen, when meals needed to be ready, what the men liked to eat, how to manage the enormous amounts of food required to feed so many hungry workers. Cookie was a patient teacher, showing her how to make his biscuits fluffy, how to season a stew properly, how to tell when bread had risen enough to bake. She still had not been formally introduced to Miss Kelly, the ranch owner, though she had seen the woman from a distance a few times. Miss Kelly was probably in her early 30s, tall and slim with light brown hair usually pinned up in a practical bun. She often wore split riding skirts and spent her days working alongside her men, mending fences and checking cattle. The ranch hands spoke of her with respect bordering on awe. She had taken over after her father's death and had proven herself as capable as any man at running the operation. Adelaide saw Nathan more frequently now, though they still had not had a real conversation since that first night. He came in for meals with the other hands, always polite, always nodding to her in acknowledgement, but never seeking her out specifically. She told herself she should not feel disappointed by this. He had given her a job and a place to live, which was more than she had any right to expect. But she found herself watching for him nonetheless, noticing little things about him. The way he sometimes smiled at something one of the other men said, the careful way he treated the younger ranch hands, the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. One evening, about 2 weeks after Adelaide had started working at the ranch, Cookie asked her to take a pot of stew and some biscuits out to the men who were working late in the far pasture, bringing in a group of cattle that had wandered. Adelaide bundled up against the cold, loaded the food into a basket, and followed Cookie's directions to where the men were working. She found them near a large corral, about 6 men on horseback working to guide a group of anxious cattle through a gate. It was nearly dark, and they were working by the light of several torches stuck into the ground. Adelaide set the basket down near a wagon and called out that she had brought food. One of the men, a young fellow named Billy who could not have been more than 19, whooped with joy and immediately rode over. "Miss Adelaide, you are a sight for sore eyes," he said, dismounting and tying his horse. "We have been out here since noon without a bite." The other men quickly followed, tying their horses and gathering around the food. Adelaide served them, ladling stew into the tin bowls they carried on their saddles and handing out biscuits. They ate standing up, too hungry to wait or bother with sitting. She noticed Nathan was among them, though he hung back, letting the other men eat first. "There is plenty," she called to him. "Come get some before it gets cold." He walked over, pulling off his gloves and accepting the bowl she filled for him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I should be thanking you," she replied, keeping her voice low so the other men would not hear. "You saved my life, I think. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not found me in that church." Nathan looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You are working for your keep." "You do not owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Adelaide said firmly, "and I want you to know that I am aware of that." Before he could respond, one of the other men called out, "Kane, get over here. This fence post is split and we need to decide if we should fix it now or wait for morning." Nathan nodded to Adelaide and walked away, taking his food with him. She watched him go, then began collecting the empty bowls from the men who had finished eating. Billy stayed to help her pack everything back into the basket. "Nathan is a good man," Billy said conversationally as they worked. "One of the best. He has been at this ranch longer than almost anyone except Cookie. Miss Kelly trusts him with just about everything. He seems very dedicated to his work," Adelaide said carefully. "He is dedicated to this place because Mr. Kelly, that was Miss Kelly's father, gave him a chance when no one else would," Billy continued. "Nathan never talks about it much, but I heard he had a real rough time before he came here. Now he is the hardest working man on the ranch. Miss Kelly depends on him for everything." Adelaide filed this information away, adding it to the small collection of things she knew about Nathan Kane. She thanked Billy for his help and made her way back to the kitchen, where Cookie was waiting to help her clean the dishes. As November gave way to December, the weather grew colder and snow began to fall in earnest. Adelaide had never experienced a winter like this, the brutal, unrelenting cold of the high plains where the wind seemed to cut right through any amount of clothing. But she was warm enough in her little house, and Cookie showed her how to bank the fire at night so it would last until morning. Her life had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She woke, worked, ate, slept, and repeated the cycle day after day. It was hard work, but it was honest, and she was no longer hungry or cold or afraid. Cookie was teaching her to be a better cook, and she was learning quickly, developing a feel for seasoning and timing. The ranch hands had accepted her presence, greeting her with friendly nods and occasional conversation. She was beginning to feel like she was part of something, part of this community of people working together to survive the harsh Wyoming winter. The only thing that disrupted her growing sense of peace was her increasing awareness of Nathan. She could not seem to stop noticing him, the way he moved with easy grace despite his size, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentle way he handled the horses, the quiet authority he had among the other men. She found herself looking for him at meals, listening for his voice, feeling a small thrill of pleasure when their eyes met across the kitchen. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She was a woman alone in the world with no prospects and no family. She had no business developing feelings for anyone, especially not a man who had only shown her kindness, and had given no indication he thought of her as anything other than someone who worked on the same ranch. But her heart seemed to have its own ideas, and it insisted on beating faster every time Nathan Kane was near. The first real snowstorm hit in mid-December, a howling blizzard that came on fast and furious one afternoon while Adelaide was helping Cookie prepare dinner. The wind rose to a shriek, and snow began falling so thickly that they could not see more than a few feet beyond the kitchen windows. "Mercy," Cookie said, peering out at the white void. "This is a bad one. The men will need to get the horses secured and the cattle into the near pastures before they lose visibility completely." Adelaide helped him finish preparing the food, but as the storm worsened, it became clear that many of the men would not make it back for dinner. Those who did come in were covered in snow, their faces red with cold, speaking urgently about getting back out to help secure the ranch before the storm got worse. It was nearly dark when Nathan came into the kitchen, looking more disheveled than Adelaide had ever seen him. His coat was covered in snow, his face was chapped from the wind, and there was blood on his hand. "Nathan, you are hurt," Adelaide said immediately, moving toward him. He looked down at his hand as if surprised to see the blood. "Just a scratch. Caught it on some barbed wire while we were securing the fence. It is nothing." "It needs to be cleaned and bandaged," Adelaide said firmly. "Sit down." She expected him to argue, but perhaps he was too tired, because he simply sank into one of the kitchen chairs and let her examine his hand. The cut was on his palm, deep enough to have bled considerably, but not deep enough to need stitches. Adelaide heated water and cleaned the wound carefully, her fingers gentle on his rough, calloused skin. She was acutely aware of how close they were, of the way he watched her face as she worked, of the warmth of his hand in hers. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "I have had worse," he said, his voice equally quiet. She tore a clean cloth into strips and bandaged his hand, wrapping it carefully to keep the wound clean. When she finished, she found herself reluctant to let go, her fingers still resting lightly on his wrist. She looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something intense and searching in his dark eyes. "Adelaide," he said, and the way he spoke her name like it meant something made her heart race. "Miss Adelaide." Billy's voice interrupted them as he burst into the kitchen, covered in snow and breathing hard. "Cookie, we need blankets and hot coffee. 3 of the men got caught in the storm while checking the north fence. They made it back, but they are half frozen." The moment shattered. Adelaide pulled her hands back and stood quickly, moving to help Cookie gather blankets and prepare hot drinks. Nathan rose as well, testing his bandaged hand. "I will go help get them settled," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing back into the storm. Adelaide threw herself into helping Cookie care for the men who had been caught in the blizzard. They were indeed half frozen, their lips blue and their hands so cold they could barely hold the cups of hot coffee Cookie pressed into them. Adelaide wrapped them in blankets and helped remove their wet outer clothes, hanging everything near the stove to dry. Cookie made a rich, hot soup, and they fed it to the men slowly, warming them from the inside out. The storm raged all night and into the next day. Adelaide did not return to her little house, instead staying in the kitchen with Cookie, keeping the stove going and preparing food for the men who came and went in shifts, constantly working to protect the livestock and the ranch buildings from the worst of the storm. She caught a few hours of sleep on a pallet Cookie made up for her near the stove, but mostly she worked, cooking and cleaning and doing whatever was needed. Nathan came in a few times, always checking on the condition of the men who had been caught in the cold, always making sure they had enough supplies. Each time, his eyes sought Adelaide's across the room, and each time she felt that strange connection between them, like an invisible thread pulling taut. The storm finally blew itself out on the second day, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow. Drifts piled up against buildings, and the whole world seemed to be painted in shades of white and gray. Adelaide finally returned to her little house to sleep properly, and she woke many hours later to find that someone, probably Nathan, had come in and built up her fire while she slept. Christmas came a week later, and Cookie insisted on preparing a special dinner for everyone at the ranch. Miss Kelly announced that there would be no work except essential animal care on Christmas Day, and that everyone was invited to eat together in the main house. Adelaide helped Cookie prepare a feast, roasting several chickens, making mountains of mashed potatoes and gravy, baking pies and cakes, and putting together every special dish they could manage with their supplies. When the meal was served in Miss Kelly's dining room, Adelaide found herself sitting at a long table crowded with ranch hands, all dressed in their cleanest clothes and on their best behavior. Miss Kelly sat at the head of the table and said grace before the meal, thanking God for everyone's safety during the recent storm and for the food they were about to share. Adelaide had been seated between Billy and an older ranch hand named Tom, with Nathan directly across from her. She tried not to look at him too often, but it was difficult. He had shaved and put on a clean shirt, and without his usual layer of trail dust and stubble, he was even more handsome than usual. The meal was festive, with the men laughing and telling stories, relaxed in a way they rarely were during working hours. Miss Kelly proved to be a warm and gracious hostess, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drawing out even the shyest men in conversation. When she learned that Adelaide was the one who had made the apple pies, she insisted on a round of applause that made Adelaide blush. After dinner, someone produced a fiddle and someone else had a guitar, and there was music and singing. Some of the men pushed back furniture and danced with each other, clowning around and laughing. Miss Kelly danced with several of her hands, treating them all like the valued employees they were. Adelaide was standing near the wall, watching the festivities and smiling when Nathan appeared at her elbow. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Her heart jumped into her throat. "I am not a very good dancer," she admitted. "Neither am I," he said, extending his hand. "But I thought maybe we could figure it out together." Adelaide placed her hand in his, and he led her to the edge of the dancing area. The fiddler was playing something slow and sweet, and Nathan placed his other hand carefully on her waist, holding her like she was something precious that might break. They swayed together, not really dancing so much as moving in time to the music, and Adelaide felt like every nerve in her body was alive and singing. "How is your hand?" she asked, needing to say something to break the tension. "Healing well, thanks to you," he said. He was looking down at her with that expression again, the one she could not quite read. "Adelaide, I wanted to talk to you about something." Yes. Her voice came out breathier than she intended. I have been thinking about you, he said, and then seemed to struggle with how to continue. I have been thinking about how you are doing, if you are settling in all right, if you need anything. It was not quite what she had hoped he would say, but she appreciated the concern nonetheless. I am doing well, she told him honestly. Better than I have been in a very long time, thanks to you. I told you you do not need to thank me. And I told you I owe you everything, she replied softly. They continued to sway to the music, and Adelaide allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this were something more. If Nathan's interest in her went beyond simple kindness. If she were the kind of woman a man like him might actually care for. But she was not that woman. She was just Adelaide Dawson, a girl with no family, no prospects, and nothing to offer anyone. Nathan Kane was a good man who had helped her out of pity, and she would do well to remember that and not make a fool of herself by reading more into his actions than was there. The song ended, and Nathan released her, stepping back with a small bow. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "Thank you for asking me," she replied. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but Billy appeared at that moment, asking Adelaide if she would dance with him. She agreed, and by the time that dance was finished, Nathan had disappeared. She did not see him again for the rest of the evening. Winter deepened into January, and life on the ranch continued in its rhythms of work and rest, of cold and warmth, of meals and sleep. Adelaide's skills in the kitchen improved, and Cookie increasingly trusted her with more complex tasks. She made her first unassisted stew, baked bread that earned praise from the ranch hands, and learned to fry chicken until it was perfectly golden and crispy. She also began to take on other tasks around the ranch. When one of the men came down with a fever, she helped nurse him, applying cold compresses and making sure he drank enough fluids. When a rip appeared in someone's coat or shirt, she mended it with neat, careful stitches, putting to use the sewing skills she had learned back in Philadelphia. The men began bringing her their mending, and she found she did not mind. It gave her something useful to do in the evenings besides sit alone in her little house. She saw Nathan regularly, but they rarely spoke beyond simple pleasantries. He seemed to be avoiding her, or perhaps she was imagining it. Perhaps he was simply busy with his work as winter made every task on the ranch more difficult and time-consuming. But she could not shake the feeling that something had changed between them since Christmas night, that he was deliberately keeping his distance. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. She had tried so hard not to develop feelings for him, but it seemed her heart had not listened. She found herself thinking about him constantly, replaying their few conversations, analyzing every glance and gesture for hidden meaning. She told herself she was being pathetic, mooning over a man who had shown her kindness but nothing more, but knowing this did not make her feelings any easier to control. In late January, Cookie pulled her aside after breakfast one morning. "Miss Kelly wants to see you," he said. "She is in her office in the main house." Adelaide felt a flutter of nervousness. She had still not officially met the ranch owner, and she worried that perhaps her work was not satisfactory, perhaps she was going to be let go. She quickly tidied her hair and smoothed down her apron before knocking on the door of Miss Kelly's office. "Come in," called a warm voice. Adelaide entered to find a comfortable room lined with bookshelves, with a large desk covered in papers and ledgers. Miss Kelly stood from behind the desk, smiling and extending her hand. "Miss Dawson, I have been meaning to speak with you for weeks now. Please sit down." Adelaide shook her hand and sat in the offered chair, her nervousness increasing. Miss Kelly settled back behind her desk, her gray eyes kind. "First, I want to thank you for the work you have been doing. Cookie tells me you have been invaluable to him, and several of my men have mentioned how much better the meals have been with your help. I apologize for not making time to speak with you sooner. The winter has been demanding, and I am afraid I tend to focus too much on the outdoor work and neglect the domestic side of things. That is quite all right, madam, Adelaide said, relief flooding through her. I am just grateful to have the work. Cookie also told me about your circumstances, Miss Kelly continued gently. How Nathan found you in the church. I want you to know that you have a permanent position here for as long as you want it. I would like to offer you a salary of $20 a month, plus room and board. Does that seem fair? $20 a month was more than Adelaide had dared to hope for. It was enough to start saving, to perhaps eventually have a small amount of security. That is more than fair, madam. Thank you. Good. Now there is another matter I wanted to discuss with you. Miss Kelly leaned back in her chair, studying Adelaide with an expression that was hard to read. Nathan Kane came to me a few weeks ago and asked me to ensure that you were being fairly compensated for your work. He seemed quite concerned about your welfare. Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. Mr. Kane has been very kind to me. Nathan is kind to everyone, Miss Kelly said. But I have known him for many years, and I have never seen him take such a personal interest in anyone's situation before. I am not trying to pry, Miss Dawson. I simply want to make sure that you are comfortable here and that you know that you are valued for your work, not just because Nathan asked me to look after you. I understand, Adelaide said, and I appreciate your concern. I am very comfortable here and I truly enjoy the work. Miss Kelly smiled. I am glad to hear it. Now I have kept you long enough. I am sure Cookie is wondering where you have gotten to. Adelaide returned to the kitchen feeling oddly unsettled. Nathan had gone to Miss Kelly on her behalf, asking her to ensure Adelaide was treated fairly. It was another kindness from a man who seemed full of them, but it also reinforced what Adelaide already knew. Nathan saw her as someone who needed help, someone to be taken care of. He did not see her as a woman he might care for romantically. The thought made her chest ache. She threw herself into her work, trying to push aside her feelings and focus on the things she could control. But that night, as she sat alone in her little house mending a shirt by lamplight, she heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found Nathan standing on her step, his hat in his hands. I am sorry to bother you so late, he said. But I saw your light was still on and I wanted to talk to you about something. Adelaide's heart was suddenly racing. Of course, come in. He stepped inside and she closed the door against the cold. He seemed too large for the small space, and he looked uncomfortable, turning his hat in his hands and not meeting her eyes. Miss Kelly told me she spoke with you today, he said. About the salary and the permanent position. She did. Thank you for speaking to her on my behalf. I wanted to make sure you were being treated fairly, he said. After everything you have been through, you deserve to have some security. That is very kind of you, Adelaide said, wishing her voice did not sound so strained. Nathan finally looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. Adelaide, I need to tell you something, and I am not very good with words, so I apologize if this comes out wrong. She waited, not trusting herself to speak. I have been trying to keep my distance from you, he said slowly, because I did not want you to feel obligated to me in any way. I found you in that church and I brought you here, and I did not want you to think that you owed me anything more than honest work. But the truth is, I cannot seem to stop thinking about you. And keeping my distance is not working, because all I do is look for you anyway, watching for you at meals, listening for your voice in the kitchen, finding excuses to walk past that window where I might catch a glimpse of you. Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Nathan, I know you probably do not feel the same way, he continued, speaking faster now as if he needed to get all the words out before he lost his nerve. I know you probably just see me as the man who helped you, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable. If you want me to keep my distance, I will. But I needed you to know that my interest in your welfare is not just because I feel responsible for you. It is because I care about you, Adelaide. More than I should, probably, and certainly more than I have any right to. For a moment, Adelaide could not find her voice. She stood there, staring at this strong, kind man who had saved her life, and was now standing in her house confessing that he had feelings for her, and she felt like her heart might burst with the joy and relief of it. You think you care more than you should, she finally managed to say, her voice shaking. Nathan, I have been half in love with you since the night you found me in that church. I have been trying so hard not to feel this way, because I thought you only helped me out of pity, and I did not want to make a fool of myself by hoping for something that could never be. Nathan's expression transformed, the uncertainty giving way to something that looked like wonder. You have feelings for me. How could I not? Adelaide said, tears suddenly stinging her eyes. You saved my life. You gave me shelter and work and treated me with nothing but kindness and respect. You are good and decent and honest, and yes, Nathan Kane, I have very strong feelings for you. He dropped his hat and crossed the small space between them in 2 strides, taking her face gently in his hands. I am going to kiss you now if that is all right with you. That is more than all right, Adelaide whispered. His lips met hers, soft and warm and achingly gentle, and Adelaide felt like every cold, lonely, desperate day she had endured had been worth it, because they had led her to this moment. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all of her feelings into it, all of her gratitude and affection and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I do not have much to offer you, he said quietly. I am just a ranch hand. I have some savings, but not much. I live in the bunkhouse with 15 other men. But I promise you, Adelaide, if you will have me, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will work hard and I will be faithful, and I will never let you be cold or hungry or alone again. You have already given me so much, Adelaide said, her hands cupping his face. You have given me hope when I had none. You have given me a place in this world when I thought I had lost my place forever. I do not need wealth or luxury, Nathan. I just need you. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Adelaide felt warmth spreading through her entire body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove and everything to do with the man holding her in his arms. They spent the next hour talking, sitting close together at Adelaide's small table, holding hands and sharing the stories of their lives. Nathan told her more about his childhood in Kansas, about his father's descent into alcoholism after his mother's death, about the desperate journey west, and the years of hard work it had taken to build a life here. Adelaide told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about losing her parents to typhoid fever, about her aunt's promise and subsequent death, about the terrifying weeks of homelessness and hunger before he found her. I wish I had found you sooner, Nathan said, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. I hate thinking about you being alone and scared. But you found me exactly when you were supposed to, Adelaide said. I believe that. I believe we were meant to find each other. When Nathan finally left, promising to see her at breakfast, Adelaide lay in bed unable to sleep, too filled with happiness and excitement to rest. Everything had changed in the space of a single evening. She was no longer alone in the world. She had Nathan, and he had her, and together they would build something good and true. Their courtship was conducted quietly at first, both of them conscious of not wanting to create gossip or scandal on the ranch. But love has a way of showing itself, and it was not long before the other ranch hands noticed the way Nathan and Adelaide looked at each other, the small smiles they exchanged, the way they always seemed to gravitate toward each other. Cookie was the first to comment on it, cornering Adelaide in the kitchen one morning with a knowing smile. "So," he said, "you and Nathan finally figured out what the rest of us have known for weeks." Adelaide felt herself blush. Was it that obvious? "Only to anyone with eyes," Cookie said kindly. "I am happy for you both. Nathan is a good man, one of the best I have ever known. And you, my dear, are a good woman who has earned some happiness." Billy was equally supportive, congratulating Nathan with enthusiastic backslaps and teasing him about being sweet on the pretty kitchen help. The other men followed suit, and Adelaide found herself welcomed even more fully into the ranch community now that she was acknowledged as Nathan's sweetheart. Miss Kelly called them both into her office one afternoon in mid-February. Adelaide felt nervous, worried that perhaps the ranch owner disapproved of the relationship, but Miss Kelly's expression was warm. "I wanted to talk to you both about your living arrangements," she said, looking between them. "Nathan, you have been living in the bunkhouse for 9 years. I think it is time you had more privacy and comfort. The foreman's house where Adelaide is staying is certainly big enough for 2 people, and I assume that is where this relationship is heading eventually." Nathan and Adelaide exchanged glances. They had not discussed marriage yet, though it had been implied in everything they said to each other, in every kiss and every plan they made. "Miss Kelly, I do not want to presume," Nathan started, but Miss Kelly held up a hand. "I am not presuming anything. I am simply saying that if you two wish to marry, you have my blessing, and you have a home here on this ranch for as long as you want it. Nathan, you are invaluable to me, and Adelaide, you have made Cookie's life immeasurably easier. I would hate to lose either of you." "We have no plans to leave," Nathan said firmly. He looked at Adelaide, his eyes warm. "I cannot speak for Adelaide, but this ranch is my home, and I would like it to be our home if she agrees." "I agree," Adelaide said softly. "This place has become home to me as well." "Good," Miss Kelly said, smiling. "Then consider the matter settled, and for what it is worth, my father would have approved heartily. He always said Nathan had the truest heart of any man he knew." That evening, Nathan walked Adelaide back to her little house after dinner. The February night was cold but clear, with stars blazing in the black sky overhead. Halfway to the house, Nathan stopped and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "Adelaide Dawson," he said, his voice formal but shaking slightly with emotion. "I do not have a ring to offer you, and this is probably the least romantic proposal in history, but I need to ask. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life loving you and taking care of you?" Adelaide felt tears spilling down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I would be honored to be your wife." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in the middle of the ranch yard, and Adelaide did not care if anyone saw them. She was engaged to Nathan Kane, the man who had saved her life and stolen her heart, and she had never been happier. They were married 3 weeks later, in early March, in the same church where Nathan had first found Adelaide sleeping beneath the pews. Reverend Thomas officiated, smiling broadly as he pronounced them husband and wife. Cookie was there, sniffling into his handkerchief. Miss Kelly attended with several of the ranch hands, all dressed in their Sunday best. Billy served as Nathan's best man, and Mrs. Thompson, the minister's wife, stood up with Adelaide. Adelaide wore a simple dress that Miss Kelly had given her, cream-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nathan wore a new suit that he had purchased with his savings, dark and well-fitting. When Reverend Thomas told him he could kiss his bride, Nathan cupped Adelaide's face in his calloused hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation sighed audibly. The wedding breakfast was held in the ranch kitchen, with Cookie outdoing himself to produce a feast of scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, fried potatoes, and a beautiful cake he had made in secret. There were toasts and laughter and music, and Adelaide felt surrounded by warmth and goodwill. These people, this community of rough cowboys and kind souls, had become her family. As the sun set that evening, Nathan carried Adelaide over the threshold of what was now their home, the little house that had once been her sanctuary and was now the beginning of their life together. He set her down gently and closed the door behind them, shutting out the world. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," Adelaide replied, her heart full to bursting. They came together in the lamplight, and Nathan made love to her with patience and tenderness, taking his time to learn her body and show her pleasure she had never imagined. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Adelaide's head on Nathan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. "Neither did I," Nathan replied, his fingers stroking through her hair. "I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, but then I found you and everything changed." "You saved me," Adelaide said. "No," Nathan corrected gently. "We saved each other." The months that followed were among the happiest of Adelaide's life. She woke each morning next to her husband, helped Cookie in the kitchen during the day, and spent her evenings with Nathan, cooking dinner for just the two of them in their little house, talking about their days, making plans for their future. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days. The ranch came alive with activity as calves were born and branded, fences were repaired, and preparations were made for moving the cattle to summer pastures. Nathan was busier than ever, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark, but he always came home to Adelaide, always greeted her with a kiss and a smile that made her feel like the most important person in his world. In May, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening after dinner, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. His face lit up with such joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Nathan said. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Adelaide continued working in the kitchen, though Cookie insisted she take more breaks and not lift anything heavy. Nathan became almost comically protective, constantly worrying about her health and safety. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly about it, but it was all done with affection. Miss Kelly announced that she was increasing Adelaide's salary, and that after the baby came, Adelaide could work shorter hours if she wished. "You and Nathan are family here," she said simply, "and family takes care of each other." In October, as the leaves turned gold and red and the weather began to cool, Adelaide went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon. Nathan stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, while Mrs. Thompson and Miss Kelly attended to the medical aspects with the help of the doctor from town. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Mrs. Thompson placed the squalling infant in Adelaide's arms, she looked down at his red face and shock of dark hair and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. He was crying, tears streaming down his face as he touched their son's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. Nathan thought for a moment. "What about Samuel? After Mr. Kelly, the man who gave me a chance," Adelaide smiled. "Samuel Kane, I love it." Little Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy under his parents' devoted care. Adelaide reduced her hours in the kitchen, working only in the mornings so she could spend afternoons with her son. Nathan's days off were spent entirely with his small family, and Adelaide often found him simply sitting and watching Samuel sleep, a look of wonder on his face. The years passed in a rhythm of work and love, of seasons changing and life unfolding. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for Adelaide's mother. 2 years after that came another boy, William, whom they called Will. The little house became crowded with 3 children, and Nathan spoke to Miss Kelly about building an addition. She agreed immediately, and Nathan spent his spare time that summer adding 2 rooms to the house, a bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen for Adelaide. The ranch hands helped with the construction, turning it into a community project, and by fall the expanded house was finished. Adelaide sometimes thought back to that desperate girl sleeping on the church floor, cold and hungry and alone, and she could hardly believe that girl had been her. Her life had transformed so completely, so wonderfully that it felt like a dream. But it was not a dream. It was real, built on the foundation of Nathan's kindness and their mutual love, brick by brick and day by day. Miss Kelly eventually married as well, a widower from town who owned the feed store. He was a good man who loved her and respected her independence, and he moved out to the ranch to be with her. They had no children of their own, but they doted on Adelaide and Nathan's brood, becoming beloved aunt and uncle to Samuel, Rose, and Will. Cookie grew older and eventually retired, though he still came to the kitchen most days to supervise and teach Adelaide new recipes. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, the whole ranch mourned him. Adelaide took over as head cook, hiring a young woman from town to help her, continuing Cookie's legacy of feeding the ranch hands well. Nathan became foreman of the Circle K when the previous foreman retired, a position he earned through years of hard work and dedication. He was respected by all the men who worked under him, known for being fair but firm, for working just as hard as he asked his men to work, for caring about the ranch and everyone on it. On their 10th anniversary, Nathan surprised Adelaide by presenting her with a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I know it is 10 years late," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but I wanted you to have it. I have been saving for it since the day we married." Adelaide looked down at the ring sparkling in the lamplight and then up at her husband's face, still as handsome to her as it had been the night he found her in the church. "You did not need to do this," she said softly, "I know, but I wanted to. You are my wife, the mother of my children, my best friend, and the love of my life. You deserve to have a ring that shows the world how precious you are to me." They made love that night with the same passion and tenderness they had brought to their wedding night a decade before, their bodies familiar with each other, but their desire undimmed by time. More years passed. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved working with horses. Rose became a bright, curious girl who loved reading and could often be found with her nose in a book. Will was the adventurous one, always getting into mischief, but with such a winning smile that no one could stay angry at him for long. When Samuel turned 18, He announced his intention to stay on at the Circle K and learn the ranching business from his father. Nathan's pride was evident, though he made sure Samuel understood the hard work involved. Rose, at 16, had caught the eye of the schoolteacher's son, a gentle boy named Thomas who treated her with respect and kindness that reminded Adelaide of Nathan. Will, at 14, was still deciding what he wanted to do with his life, but he had plenty of time to figure it out. Adelaide was 42 years old and Nathan was 47, and they had been married for 20 years when Miss Kelly called them into her office one afternoon. She was 60 now, her hair more silver than brown, but still sharp and capable. "I wanted to discuss something with you both," she said. "My husband and I have been talking about retiring. We want to travel, see some of the country before we are too old to enjoy it. We want to sell the ranch." Adelaide felt a jolt of fear. The Circle K was home. It was where she and Nathan had built their life. What would they do if it was sold? Miss Kelly must have seen the worry on their faces because she smiled. "I want to sell it to you," she clarified. "To you and Nathan. You have been the heart of this ranch for over 20 years, Nathan. You know every inch of this land, every head of cattle, every man who works here. There is no one I trust more to continue my father's legacy." Nathan looked stunned. "Miss Kelly, I do not know if we could afford it. We will work out terms that are fair to everyone," Miss Kelly said. "I am not looking to make a fortune. I am looking to ensure that this ranch stays in good hands. We can structure a payment plan that will work with your finances. Think about it, talk it over, but I hope you will say yes." Adelaide and Nathan talked late into the night, weighing the opportunity and the responsibility. It would mean taking on debt, something that frightened Adelaide after her experiences of poverty. But it would also mean true security for their family, a legacy to pass on to their children. In the end, they said yes. The paperwork was drawn up, the payment plan established, and Nathan Kane became the owner of the Circle K Ranch. It was a dream he had never dared to dream, and it had come true because of hard work, loyalty, and the trust of people who believed in him. The day the sale was finalized, Nathan and Adelaide stood together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over land that was now theirs. Nathan's arm was around Adelaide's shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "Can you believe this?" Nathan asked quietly. "That boy who was sleeping in a barn in Kansas now owns a ranch in Wyoming. And that girl who was sleeping on a church floor now owns it with you," Adelaide added. She turned to look up at her husband, at the face she loved more than any other, creased now with lines from years of sun and wind and smiling. "You once told me that church is cold and home is warm. You gave me a home that night, Nathan. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Nathan corrected, just as he had all those years ago. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. "And we still have so many more years ahead of us, so many more sunsets to watch together." They stood there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple to indigo, holding each other and dreaming about the future. Around them, the ranch was settling into evening routines, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, the warm glow of lamplight appearing in windows across the property. This was home. This was love. This was the life they had built together from nothing, from a chance encounter on a cold November night in a dark church, from kindness offered and accepted, from two lonely souls who found each other and held on tight. Adelaide thought about the words Nathan had spoken to her that first night. "Church is cold, home is warm." He had been right. The church had been cold, a place of stone and shadows where she had hidden from the world. But home, this home they had created together, was warm. It was filled with love and laughter, with the voices of their children and the memories of 20 good years with hope for all the years still to come. "I love you," Adelaide said softly. "I love you too," Nathan replied. "Always have, always will." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky, and then they went inside together, to the warmth of their home, to the life they had built, to the love that had saved them both. The years continued to pass gently. Samuel married a girl from town named Martha, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. A year later, they gave Adelaide and Nathan their first grandchild, a girl named Adelaide Rose after both grandmothers. Nathan cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family he had thought he would never have. Rose did marry Thomas, the schoolteacher's son, and they moved to Cheyenne, where Thomas took a position at the university. Rose wrote letters home every week, and she and Thomas visited often, especially after they had their own children, twin boys who loved visiting the ranch and learning to ride horses from their grandfather. Will eventually decided he wanted to be a veterinarian. He went to school in Colorado and came back to set up practice in Lusk, where he cared for the ranch animals and became an essential part of the community. He married late, at 30, to a widow with 2 children whom he loved as his own, and they added 2 more children to the family. Adelaide and Nathan watched their family grow and multiply, and every birthday, every holiday, every celebration was held at the Circle K Ranch, which had become the center of their expanding family. The house had been added onto several more times to accommodate everyone when they came to visit, and it sprawled comfortably across the landscape, a testament to love and growth and time. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town seemed to be there, along with current and former ranch hands, neighbors, friends, and family. There were speeches and toasts, stories told about Nathan's fairness as a boss and Adelaide's kindness as a friend and neighbor. There was music and dancing, and Nathan led Adelaide in a slow waltz while everyone watched and applauded. "You remember our first dance?" Nathan asked her as they swayed together. "Christmas, all those years ago," Adelaide replied. "You told me you wanted to talk to me about something." "I was trying to work up the courage to tell you I cared about you," Nathan said with a smile. "I was so afraid you would reject me." "I was so afraid you only saw me as a charity case," Adelaide confessed. "We wasted a lot of time being afraid," Nathan observed. "But we figured it out in the end," Adelaide said. "And look at everything we have built." They looked around at the crowd of people, at their children and grandchildren, at the ranch that had been their life's work, at the community they had helped build and sustain. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible. As they grew older, Adelaide and Nathan gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Samuel, who proved himself a capable manager. Nathan still rode out with the men most days, unwilling to give up the work he loved, but he took more time for leisure as well. He and Adelaide would sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. Adelaide continued to oversee the kitchen operation, though she had trained several women over the years to do the actual cooking. She spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them to bake and sew, telling them stories about the old days, making sure they knew where they came from and how blessed they were. When Nathan was 62, he had a health scare that frightened them both. He collapsed while working in the barn, and the doctor diagnosed a heart problem. He was ordered to take it easier to avoid heavy labor and stress. It was hard for Nathan, who had spent his whole life working with his hands, but Adelaide was firm with him. "You have worked hard your whole life," she told him. "You have more than earned the right to rest. Let Samuel handle the ranch operations. You have trained him well. Trust him to do the work." Nathan grumbled but complied, and to his surprise, he found he enjoyed having more time to spend with Adelaide, with his grandchildren, with the simple pleasures of life. They took walks together in the evenings, read books aloud to each other, played with their grandchildren, and traveled occasionally to visit Rose in Cheyenne or Will in town. Adelaide was 67 and Nathan 72 when they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. It was a smaller celebration this time, just family, but it was no less meaningful. Their children gave them a portrait that had been painted from a photograph, showing them as they had been on their wedding day, young and full of hope. "Look at us," Adelaide said, studying the portrait. "We were so young. We were so scared," Nathan added. "I remember being terrified that I would not be a good enough husband for you, that I could not give you the life you deserved." "You gave me everything I needed," Adelaide said firmly. "You gave me love and security and a family. You gave me a home. What more could anyone want?" That night, as they lay in bed together, Adelaide rested her head on Nathan's chest as she had done for 45 years, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was slower now, not as strong as it once was, but it was still beating, still keeping him alive, still keeping him with her. "Nathan," she said softly, "do you ever think about that night in the church, about what would have happened if you had not come in?" "I try not to," Nathan admitted. "It is too painful to imagine a world where I did not find you." "I would have died," Adelaide said matter-of-factly. "I was so close to the end. Another few days, maybe a week, and I would have been gone. You saved my life that night." "And you saved mine," Nathan said, his arms tightening around her. "I was alive, but I was not really living. I was just existing, working and sleeping and working some more. You gave me a reason to live, Adelaide. You gave me love and joy and a family. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a beautiful life together. They had been blessed with 45 years of marriage, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and more love than most people experienced in a lifetime. The years continued their gentle passage. Adelaide's hair turned completely white, and Nathan's body became frailer, but their love remained strong. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by their ever-growing family, and the party was so large it had to be held outside, with tables set up all across the ranch yard. During the speeches, Samuel stood up and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "you have shown us what love looks like. You have taught us about kindness and hard work and dedication. You have built something that will last for generations. We are all blessed to be part of your legacy." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Adelaide and Nathan held hands under the table, their fingers intertwined as they had been for 50 years. Nathan was 77 when his health began to seriously decline. The heart problems became more severe, and he spent more time resting than he liked. But even weak and tired, he insisted on spending time with Adelaide, on sitting with her on the porch, on holding her hand as they watched their grandchildren and now great-grandchildren play in the yard. "I have had a good life," he told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset, "better than I ever thought possible." "Do not talk like that," Adelaide said, though she knew what he was really saying. "You have many more years in you yet." "Maybe," Nathan said. "But if I do not, I want you to know that I have no regrets. Every moment with you has been a gift. I would do it all again exactly the same way." Adelaide felt tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "I love you so much. I love you too. Always." Nathan Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later, with Adelaide lying beside him as she had every night for 52 years. He was 77 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life surrounded by love. The funeral was held at the church in Lusk, the same church where Nathan had found Adelaide all those years ago, the same church where they had been married. It was packed with people whose lives Nathan had touched, ranch hands he had mentored, neighbors he had helped, friends he had made. They spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his hard work, his devotion to his family. They spoke of a life well lived and a man well loved. Adelaide stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to her husband, her partner, her best friend, the man who had saved her and loved her and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. As they lowered the casket into the ground, she thought about that cold November night in 1878, about the cowboy who had found her sleeping in the church and had changed everything with 5 simple words. Church is cold, home is warm. He had given her warmth when she was cold, hope when she was desperate, love when she was alone. And in return, she had given him everything she had, her heart, her loyalty, her devotion, her love. It had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything. Adelaide lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She remained at the ranch, helping where she could but mostly just being a presence, a living link to the history of the place, to the love story that had built this family. She told stories to anyone who would listen, stories about Nathan, about the old days, about how love and kindness could change everything. When Adelaide Dawson Kane passed away at the age of 87, peacefully in her sleep just like her husband, she was laid to rest beside Nathan in the Lusk cemetery. Their tombstone was simple but beautiful, bearing both their names, the dates of their lives, and a single inscription. Church is cold, home is warm, together we found home. The Circle K Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and eventually passed to his children and their children after that. But the heart of the ranch, the foundation it was built on, was always the love story of Adelaide and Nathan, the woman who slept in a church and the cowboy who woke her, who together built a home that was warm and a love that lasted beyond death. Their story became part of the ranch's legend, told and retold to each new generation. The little house where they had lived and raised their children still stood, preserved as a reminder of where it all began, of how small kindnesses can change lives, of how love can transform everything. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Wyoming plains, people would look at that little house and remember Nathan Kane's words, "Church is cold, home is warm." They would remember that home is not just a place, but people who love you. They would remember that warmth comes not from a fire and a stove, but from the human heart reaching out to another human heart in compassion and love. This was the legacy of Adelaide and Nathan Kane, a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love and family and home. It was a legacy that would endure as long as there were people who remembered that the greatest gift you can give another person is the gift of warmth in the cold, of hope in despair, of love in loneliness. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Adelaide and Nathan were together again, holding hands and watching over the family they had created, the home they had built, the love that had saved them both and had rippled out to touch so many lives. Home was warm. Love was real. And their story, beginning in a cold church on a November night in 1878, had become eternal.